Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Saturday, February 22nd, 2025, and you are listening to and watching The Rundown, my bi-weekly podcast where I talk about all things pop culture when it comes to video games or anime and maybe movies on occasion, depending on if the situation allows for it, of course. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying that. We're on episode 13. We've been doing this for quite a few weeks now, and I think I'm starting to find somewhat of a groove here that I'm kind of getting used to. But again, sometimes it takes quite a bit of episodes before you finally find a nice steady pace and something that actually works. But we're going to figure that out as we go, I suppose. As always, I am your host, Corrupt Ronin. And of course, like always, if you are new to the show or new to the channel and you haven't done so already and you actually like the show and want to help support, maybe hit that thumbs up button. Maybe even subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, whether it's the live version or the archive version. It certainly goes a long way in helping this show reach a wider audience. And for those of you who actually do that, it is much appreciated. So what are we talking about today? Well, for this episode, we got quite a bit of news. And hopefully I can get into rather deep into some of these topics without perhaps going over a bit over time. But as with every episode, I do have a lot of thoughts in regards to many topics when it comes to the news. So it does end up running over longer than I expected to. But one thing is guaranteed is that these episodes are guaranteed to be about an hour long. That's what I typically shoot for. Sometimes we go above, sometimes we go below, but we usually aim for about the hour length. Anyways, the news for this week. We're going to talk about the NetEase layoffs that hit for Marvel Rivals earlier this week, and how people have been kind of blowing that story up to be a bigger issue, or to be much bigger than it actually is, to a certain extent. There is something underlying with this particular incident that people are kind of overlooking that I want to get into a bit later as well. We're also going to talk about the GameStop CEO and how he kind of had a bit of a crash out moment on Twitter in regards to shutting down a couple of locations for the GameStop stores, that being in Canada and France. And he's got some thoughts, put it that way. Also, there's more Assassin's Creed Shadow drama because the drama never ends with that game, and I imagine it will not end until the game is out and in people's hands, and people can actually play the game to decide for themselves whether or not it's good. And then, of course, last but not least, we got to talk about that former Bioware developer who put out a video talking about Cruelty and how $70 does not buy you Cruelty. I got some thoughts about that as well. But anyways, without further ado, let us get into talking about this Marvel Rival stuff. Let's transition this page over to that. Let's see if this works properly. Hopefully it does. You better work properly. So, got an article here from thatparkplace.com. It says, Marvel Rivals layoff backlash addressed as NetEase clarifies reasoning and games development structure. So, got to go past the preamble here because I have a highlighted section that I want to put emphasis on, so to speak. The reason that they clarify for this whole incident taking place is that there are organizational reasons behind the layoffs, okay? It says, according to NetEase, the layoffs were a difficult decision made for organizational reasons and to optimize development efficiency. The cuts specifically targeted the Seattle-based design team, which comprised just 6 people. NetEase emphasized that the affected employees would be treated confidentially and respectfully, and that their contributions to the game would be acknowledged. One of the biggest takeaways from the statement is the clarification regarding Sasser's role. Sasser referring to the game designer at the Seattle-based studio who went by the name of Thaddeus Sasser. And when people kind of talked about the game in written interviews, they were usually interviewing this Thaddeus Sasser person. But it turns out that Thaddeus or Sasser was not necessarily the main lead behind the developer of the game, and I'll talk about that in just a second here. But as it says, while he was the game director for the U.S. design team, he was not the game's creative director, as some had initially assumed. NetEase confirmed that the core development of Marvel Rivals has always been led out of its, I'm going to butcher this, its Guangzhou, China office, Guangzhou, I believe it's called, or Guangzhou, China office under the leadership of producer Wei Kong Wu and game creative director Guangyu Chen. So all the main core team behind Marvel Rivals is based on their China-based studios. So the main development behind the game is based in China. And people have mistakenly thought that the Thaddeus Sasser person was the guy who pretty much helmed all of the efforts behind the game's development, which turned out to not be true. Also, put emphasis on the fact that the Seattle-based studio was all of 6 people, okay? People made a huge deal out of this, and while indeed it does suck to, witness more layoffs happen in the industry, compared to the hundreds of employees that got laid off at, let's say, a Bioware, for example, for Dragon Age the Veilguard, this was just 6 people. Not as big a deal as people were making it seem. So, like I mentioned, as I was talking about the news about this, well, before I even go on that, there was a potential boycott that was supposedly going to happen over these layoffs that people had threatened the studio with. And like many boycotts out there, the efforts kind of went in vain. Because last I checked, when the boycotts were supposed to have been happening because of this, the game, to this day, has yet to drop beneath 200,000 players, at least if we're taking Steam stats by anything to go by. And I imagine it's probably somewhere along those lines, or maybe even higher on other platforms. Keep in mind, this game is on PC, it's on PlayStation, it's on Xbox. So, I mean, you're not going to hurt it too much. I can guarantee you that much. You barely even move the numbers if you did intend to do that. But anyways, when they say optimization or organizational reasons, there may be a bit of a deeper underlying story behind that. And this is the part where I kind of want to dig deeper into what's been happening. So, got another article here by GameFile.com from one Stephen Totilo. And last time I checked, I believe this is the same Stephen Totilo that was a former editor-in-chief at Kotaku, by the way. I haven't been able to verify that, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong for those that are watching this in live or archived. But I think this is the same Stephen Totilo. Anyways, the article says, an industry earthquake, NetEase plans to cut more all-star game studios. More than a dozen teams around the world could be impacted, a source tells GameFile. It says a few years after announcing the creation or acquisition of nearly 20 Western and Japanese game studios geared to make new big-budget video games, Chinese giant NetEase is pulling back big time. Signs of that shift began appearing last November with suspensions of operations and job cuts at Canadian developer Worlds Untold, a studio NetEase had unveiled just a year earlier. January saw a similar combo of production freeze, spending cuts, and the need for new funding at Seattle-based Jarb Sparks, a studio NetEase had been proud to announce in July 2022. And then another one here, a third studio, Sweden-based Liquid Swords, announced on Monday that it was laying off workers due to shifting market conditions. NetEase had invested in the studio in 2022. So this has been, what's happening here is a much larger shift of this company basically laying off what GameFile is calling all-star studios. And when they mean all-star studios, it's that some of these studios are filled with people that were former developers on games like The Witcher, for example, former CD Projekt Red devs, like at Rebel Wolves, which is also under the banner of NetEase as well. But they can get a bit further because one Grums on X/Twitter kind of aggregated a lot of this info into a single tweet that kind of digs a bit deeper into what's going on here. Let's pull that up real quick. He says, NetEase isn't just laying off the 6-person Marvel Rivals team. It says NetEase is pulling funding from Western and potentially Japanese gaming studios. The CEO is said to be very unsatisfied with Western developers, calling them lazy, entitled, slow, and woke, according to a source I spoke with. Now, I say all the time that when people talk about them having sources that they speak with, to always take that with many grains of salt. Obviously, you don't know who the sources are. You can't verify that. And unfortunately, they can't do that for you because sources have to tend to remain anonymous for the sake of maintaining their career status. Let's put it that way. So everything you're hearing here, take with a grain of salt, but don't outright dismiss it. Let's put it that way. It says, here's a list of studios under review and potentially at risk. Fantastic Pixel Castle, Greg Street's MMO project, Rebel Wolves, former Witcher devs, Worlds Untold, shuttered in November, Skybox Labs, rumors of issues, Bad Brain Game Studios, Jacalyptic Games, Warhammer MMO they're working on apparently, Jarker Sparks, funding pulled in January, Anchor Point Studios, T-0 Entertainment, Bullet Farm, Quantic Dream, which is rumored to be in trouble, Spliced, and Anchor Point Studios. These are huge investments by NetEase, founded by top veterans from AAA gaming. and mostly made during the high-flying game demand driven by COVID boredom, a demand which has since contracted, which is true. Back during the pandemic times when people were kind of stuck inside their houses with nothing to do, the gaming industry and much of the streaming industry kind of boomed because of it. There was a huge expansion and a lot of money to be made in these industries because of people being stuck inside their houses with nothing to do. But since then, when the lockdowns have subsided and people are going back to work and they're able to travel and do the things that they couldn't do before, a lot of people no longer have the time to invest in stuff like that anymore. And a lot of that market is drying up fast. As we'll soon see what studios remain funded and which are left scrambling by new investors in a climate where, according to my source, it is extremely difficult to find game investors. Now, the highlighted section up here, what it says about lazy, entitled, slow, and woke, again, it depends on whether or not this is actually true. I would not be surprised considering that they pulled out of mostly Western studios. And a lot of Western studios, at least these days, are unfortunately full of people of all four of these particular labels, especially those on the west coast of the U.S., let's put it that way. Whether it be California or Washington or Seattle, whatever it may be, there's a lot of that going on. And last I checked, China is not too keen on the idea of putting woke anything in their games, as they don't care for it. So when it says potentially Japanese studios, I would say it's not potentially Japanese studios. There are probably some Japanese studios that are going to get caught up in this wave as well. There was one that got caught up in it way back during the summer of 2024 when the developer of Visions of Mana was shuttered literally around the time the game launched. That was Oka Studios. And the ramifications of that shutdown was kind of felt in the game, as people who have played it said that the last half of the game felt very rushed and unfinished, on top of the fact that the game never saw any bug fixes or post-launch content because the studio was no longer around, which indicates that by the time the game was finishing development, they were probably running with a skeleton crew to get the game across the finish line, which resulted in the game just not, bringing the train home in the perfect way, so to speak, when it comes to the game's ending. So it did kind of suffer from that at the end of the day. But they're kind of cleaning house. And there's been a broad shift of this happening, and not even just from the Chinese studios. One thing I've kind of noticed, I would say over the past 2 years, and this is the last point I kind of want to drive home about this. Over the last 2 years, and this is the part where I kind of have to, unfortunately, get into the political side of things just a bit here for the sake of the point I'm going to make. So back when Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it into what we know now as X, he kind of went in with a machete, so to speak, and just started axing a lot of positions in the company. Like, from what I read, before he bought Twitter, the company had roughly 7,800 employees at the company. He axed about 80% of that to where the company is now operating at around, I think it was like 1,400 employees since then. Now, when that happened, there was a whole bunch of complaints from people on the inside saying, oh my God, he's cutting all the engineers. And once he does that, Twitter's no longer going to function. It's going to shut down. It's not going to operate, and there won't be any more Twitter. And it's never going to happen. He can't do it. We're now roughly, year and a half, 2 years, somewhere close to that since he did that. And not only is Twitter still functioning fine, but it also has more features than it did before he bought it. On top of that, there was this whole thing about Twitter not being profitable because of the nature of what the platform is, the advertisers, so on and so forth, and that it wasn't sustainable, at least before he bought it. So that was kind of the reason why people were talking about how he wouldn't be able to maintain it and keep it going and how it was shut down, so on and so forth. But just recently, it was announced that he finally got the company in a position where it can finally be profitable. And I imagine a lot of that had to do with the fact that he literally axed a significant portion of the staff that worked at Twitter, which may be an indication of these people in these positions not necessarily being critical to the overall functionality and sustainability of the platform. And since then, this is me just opining on this, so take everything you're hearing me say with a grain of salt. But I have noticed that since that happened, there were a lot of businesses that were vocal in how they were against him doing this, while at the same time behind the scenes, very quietly doing the exact same thing. And that has been happening ever since. If anything, he basically showed the entire business world that the bloat of employees that they hired over the pandemic was completely not necessary. And I imagine you're going to continue to see this throughout many industries going forward over the next few years. Being vocal about how you didn't care for who he is and what he did, while at the same time basically copying what he's doing behind the scenes. NetEase probably being no stranger to that as well. And considering what's been going on with Western studios as a whole and how they've been delivering some less than stellar products overall, I imagine NetEase is kind of having second thoughts about buying a lot of these studios. Now, the studios listed here are studios that are potentially going to be audited to find out whether or not they should be shut down or should have the funding pulled. So every studio you see here isn't necessarily in trouble yet, but if they get audited and are proved to not be pulling their weight or not have nothing to show after all this time and all the money being spent, then you might be seeing more of these studios get shut down at some point. I imagine studios like Rebel Wolves, for example, most likely won't be on the chopping block because they did reveal the game that they're working on so far, which was that vampire game that they announced a few weeks ago, which honestly looks pretty interesting if I'm going to be completely honest with you. So Rebel Wolves probably won't be going anywhere. Fantastic Pixel, they already announced that they won't be going anywhere when this news broke out. They said that they already passed the audit fine. But the rest of these, it's kind of up in the air, right? So we'll see what happens going into the future. But yeah, as it stands right now, this is probably just the beginning when it comes to layoffs in 2025. You're probably going to see more. Like as of right now, the six people that were laid off at the Seattle studio, like that's relatively small in comparison to a lot of the layoffs that have happened last year and at the beginning of this year. We consider Bioware as one of those potential casualties in this whole thing. So prepare to see more. It ain't going to stop. It's just the beginning. But anyways, on the topic of things closing down and people getting laid off and probably CEOs crashing out over the whole issue in general, let's talk about the GameStop CEO kind of losing his shit. So this article from Park Place says GameStop CEO goes off on DEI and X-Post as retail chain looks to sell off Canadian and French locations. Says GameStop CEO Ryan Cohen has stirred controversy after taking X this week, where he appeared to place the blame for GameStop's struggle on its decision to exit markets in Canada and France squarely on wokeness and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI policies. The gaming retailer, which has faced mounting challenges over the last decade, announced plans to sell its operations in both countries. In an official release, GameStop said it was evaluating its international assets and intends to offload its Canadian and French branches. The company currently operates over 200 stores in Canada and nearly 650 across Europe. Shortly after the announcement, Cohen posted on X, sharing his thoughts on the business climate in Canada and France. And we'll just read that tweet ourselves, shall we? This comes from Ryan Cohen. He says, email M&A@GameStop.com if you're interested in buying GameStop Canada or Micromania France. High taxes, liberalism, socialism, progressivism, wokeness, and DEI included at no additional cost if you buy today. Now, this is obviously a bit of a tongue-in-cheek tweet, but I imagine this comes from a place of frustration with how things are going with GameStop as a whole. Does that mean that everything that has happened to this company in regards to its locations in France and Canada is solely based on wokeness and DEI or the things he's saying here? Probably not, but I imagine they've had an effect to some degree. But if we're going to be completely honest in regards to GameStop, GameStop has been kind of falling by the wayside for quite some time now. Mostly being due to the fact that physical media as a whole has seen a sharp decline over the past decade as people tend to turn their sites more to digital because digital is just more convenient and people are lazy. But also the fact, at least in my case, that the nearest GameStop is damn near two cities over. And I am not going out of my way to drive over 2 cities just to go to a single store to buy video games. There was a point in time where that was convenient, but not anymore. And I'm just not doing it. The common joke that GameStop had back in the day was how they tried to basically nickel and dime you about subscribing to their subscribing to Game Informer or getting on a subscription for the power stuff, the power rewards card and all that stuff, you would get nickel and dime, or pre-ordering games that you don't want to pre-order, and people were kind of getting tired of that. But that was kind of how GameStop was making money to sustain itself as a business, was because of the Game Informer subscriptions, the power rewards cards, the pre-orders. That was how they were staying in business. But because it's been so convenient these days to not utilize any of that, and considering that Game Informer has now been shut down, which I imagine is due largely in part to them no longer being needed anymore, and the ever evolving landscape of gaming media as a whole, whether it's buying games digitally or reading about video games online or watching your favorite YouTubers talk about video games, a lot of these legacy media outlets are going by the wayside. So I imagine a lot of that stuff is a major component into why GameStop is suffering these days. And they probably realize that at some point they're going to have to start, withdrawing a lot of their reach in different international parts of the world. And Canada and Europe was probably the easiest places to cut, because they probably are full of the very things that he listed here, like high taxes and socialism and progressivism and wokeness and DEI. As many would tell you that Canada, especially places like Montreal and Quebec, are kind of ground zero for what some would call wokeness, quote unquote, and DEI, if Sweet Baby Inc. and Ubisoft are anything to go by. So I understand his frustration with a lot of that, but I don't think you can solely blame that just on wokeness and DEI. There's a bit more to this story that he's letting on in his tweet. Although you can tell it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but you can also tell that there's definitely some frustration there with what's been going on lately, and I kind of understand where it's coming from. Now, the question is whether or not we're going to see GameStop in 10 years. Who knows at this point? Because one thing for sure is that GameStop is kind of failing to evolve with the times. Because they're a physical-based store, they don't necessarily have what they need to maintain themselves anymore. Like, I can't remember the last time I heard somebody talk about going to a GameStop to buy a game. People in my community obviously have some game stores that they go to, like Thomas, for example, who goes out and buy physical copies. But even then, you don't need a GameStop to do that, when you consider that Amazon is kind of eating everyone's lunch in terms of, being convenient for people to buy even physical copies of games from, for example. So, yeah, GameStop, unless they pull a rabbit out of a hat, they might not be around in the next 10 years based on how things are going. Maybe not even in the next 5 based on how things are going. We'll see. But anyways, speaking of things that may not be around for too much longer with the way things are going, let's talk a little bit about that Assassin's Creed business that's been going on. I did mention there's some drama floating around about that as well. So give me a second here while I pull up the news about that one real quick. Let's go over here real quick. Go back to that screen, and I'll fix that in just a second. Hold on. Let's see, do I have that here? I should have that here, shouldn't I? Wait, do I not have that here? Do I not have that here? Oh, here we go. Okay, there we go. I was like, where's my article at? I thought I had it saved up in a bookmark, but I guess not. Okay. So this next article here I have comes from Bounding into Comics. Since after learning that Assassin's Creed Shadows allows players to trash a real-world Japanese Shinto shrine, current caretakers vowed to take appropriate action against Ubisoft. Goes on to say, another day, yet another case of Ubisoft finding themselves in hot water over Assassin's Creed Shadows. This time, as the caretakers of a specific Japanese Shinto shrine have announced that they will be taking appropriate action against the developer for allowing players to freely destroy a digital recreation of the historical religious site. Now, for those who don't know, the Shinto shrine in Japan has not just a sacred significance, but also a memorable one as well, as it was one of the few shrines that managed to mostly remain intact after the unfortunate events of World War II and the bombings that happened. They eventually rebuilt the shrine, I want to say roughly around 1953, as it says here. And it's kind of been a place of remembrance for a lot of Japanese about what happened back then and how it is a landmark of how they were able to survive and flourish yet again, both physically and economically during that time with the rebuilding of the shrine. So that's pretty much what it looks like today. In Assassin's Creed, however, there's a clip that went around of a player who had a preview build of the game that was effectively going around the area around the shrine and kind of terrorizing the NPCs and basically destroying much of the stuff within the shrine itself. And we'll probably take a brief look at that real quick. Like I just has all this stuff like, oh, this went viral. Basically, you have it going around, kind of meeting the NPCs, so on and so forth. But then once it gets inside, just kind of going around and just destroying stuff. And when you look at this stuff at face value, you just kind of think like, oh, it's just him just going around and the environment is destructible. What's the problem here? When you don't have the context of the cultural significance around the shrine itself and why they would be offended by allowing you to do this in the shrine. I mean, I remember games like Ghost of Tsushima, for example, where there were shrines in that game that you can go to and visit. However, the sole purpose of you going to those shrines was to pay respect to the shrines and not necessarily destroy them or terrorize the people around them. In Assassin's Creed case, you can kind of do both. And while I imagine it wasn't intentional for them to effectively disrespect these sacred cultural grounds that the games are kind of recreating, or the game is kind of recreated. Unfortunately, with the amount of drama that's been going on around the game since its initial reveal, and just people effectively dogpiling the game ever since then, and not to say dogpiling as if it's like the game is being victimized for what it's doing. No. The dogpiling is happening for a reason, and I would say in most cases it's pretty much justified. They kind of did this to themselves. As I said before, when it comes to Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed Shadows, this whole thing is self-inflicted wounds. But basically, the caretakers of the shrine, I could find that part of the article they were talking about this. Hold on. I had it highlighted, and unfortunately it's gone. There we go. It says, notably, the censors of player freedom came as a particular shock to the shrine's aforementioned caretakers, who in response to being asked about the situation by Japanese news outlet Sankei Shinbun, I'm pronouncing that correctly, says we will take appropriate action. Further, when pressed as to whether or not they had been contacted by Ubisoft regarding the site's location in the game, they recalled, no, if there had been, we would have refused. So not only did they recreate the shrine in the game, but they hadn't even contacted the people who manage and maintain the shrine itself to understand its cultural significance and why you shouldn't do this. Which is really weird for a company that says for this game that they're trying to be respectful to Japanese culture while also trying to be somewhat historically accurate. But the further we dig into what's been going on behind the scenes of this game, we find that everything that they've been claiming about what this game is doing and how much attention they paid to it is actually bullshit, for lack of a better way to describe it. It's bullshit. So unfortunately, this is going to keep happening. Now, when it comes to Assassin's Creed Shadows, there's a lot of people out there that keep saying, well, just cancel the game already. Just cancel the game. There's too much drama going around on it. I don't even know why they bothered to do this. Just cancel the game. I do not agree. I don't think the game should be canceled. And here's why. I want the game to be released. I want it to be judged by the market. If it is successful, then that means there was a market demand for the game. If it is not successful, then that means that there wasn't a market for the game and there was no demand for it at all, and people didn't like what they saw. However, I may not want the game to be canceled, but that does not mean that I want the game to succeed. Quite the contrary. I personally do want the game to fail for the sole purpose of knocking Ubisoft down a few pegs. Although in this case, it might just take the whole company out altogether, which, based on some of the insiders that have come out about Ubisoft and a lot of the development behind this game, there are a few developers within the company that kind of want the same thing. Mostly due to the fact that they realize, and all of us have realized as gamers, that Ubisoft has kind of reveled in its arrogance over the past decade. And there's been a deliberate negligence to listen to the market or the audience or what people are saying, and the amount of lies that have come out from the company, especially in regards to Shadows and its quote-unquote respect to Japanese culture or its historical accuracy. This is one of those cases where I don't want the game to be canceled because I don't think canceling it is going to prove anything. I want it to come out and I want it to fail to send a message in regards to not only being disrespectful to a culture, but being disrespectful to the gamers on top of that. And this idea that you can still be completely oblivious and tone deaf to the market and then believe that you're still going to succeed and be successful. So I will come forward and say that I do want the game to fail. I don't want it to be canceled. I want it to come out and I want it to fail. Now, there's a strong chance that it may not fail. I've been saying it time and time again on Discord when we're having these discussions on the Discord channel that there is a very real possibility that this game will succeed. The Streisand effect does not necessarily always work in a negative, from a negative perspective. It could also bolster a game to the sense of people wanting to play it to find out what's so bad about it. And that can result in a lot of sales. And I imagine in Assassin's Creed Shadows case, we'll probably see a bit of that. Will it be enough to save the entire company? Probably not, because it depends on how much money they threw into this game in the first place, which I imagine is a lot considering how many times it's been delayed when it's supposed to have come out in November of last year, and now we're waiting until March of this year for an official release. And then there's been rumors about a delay happening yet again, which, you know, has yet to be verified, but there's still a real possibility that it might happen too. So, no, I don't want the game to be canceled. I want it to come out, and I kind of want it to fail. Which is unfortunate because I was waiting for an Assassin's Creed in Japan for well over a decade, and I imagine I was not alone in that case. We almost had one a long time ago, and Ubisoft just kept not listening to the fan base and pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off, to the point where now that they're doing it, people are kind of finding themselves no longer wanting it based on what they've seen so far. Again, self-inflicted wounds. But we'll see what the future holds. Game's supposed to be out in March. Now, the question is whether or not am I going to play it? I don't know. Maybe. It depends on whether or not people want to see me play it. If not, then maybe I won't play it. But if they do, then shit, maybe I will. If anything, just listen, I got a Steam link. If you want to donate a gift copy of the game, then I'll definitely check it out and get my thoughts on it. But if not, then that means there's no interest to see me play it, which I probably won't. Just get thoughts and opinions from those that have played it. We'll see what happens. Anyways, speaking of other train wrecks, our last bit of news here comes from a former Bioware developer. And I think he may have been recently laid off with the wave of layoffs that hit Bioware after Dragon Age: The Veilguard. But there was a video that he released basically asking the question, not asking the question, but making a statement that $70 does not buy you cruelty. What the title says in the video, at least. So in this video is about 14 minutes long, so I'm probably not going to go over the entire video. I have watched the entire video myself, and I kind of picked up on the general points that he's basically making throughout the video. So let's take a look at that real quick. Let's come back over here. Basically, what he's saying is that, in no uncertain terms, that $70 does not buy you the ability to be unkind to developers when a product does not meet your needs or is unsatisfactory or is bad, so to speak. And the whole video kind of turns into a bit of a lecture about how you shouldn't do that because you don't understand the exact conditions that happened within the studio that led to the game being bad, whether it's the writing, the combat, or the general gameplay, the art style, whatever it might be. And because you don't understand that, you shouldn't be mean or cruel to the people that are responsible for it. There's one point he said here, let me see. Oh yeah, he's basically telling people who to effectively direct their blame to when it comes to figuring out whose fault it is about a game being bad. Talks about that a little bit in this section as well.
Targeting people directly, even the executive producer.
I get the volume working. Is it working? Is that coming through?
I
think it is.
But you know what? If you feel the need, the higher up in the organization you go, the more I'm going to say have at her. As you get beyond the executive producer and you get up into studio leadership and group leadership and the C-suite and the person in charge of the entire corporation, they share responsibility in the game you don't like being the way that it is. So if you feel the need to yell at them, again, probably don't, but they're big boys and girls, so they should be able to handle it. Now, the reality is most of those people do not have a social media presence.
which is kind of a problem in itself because that means you don't really have a pulse on what's going on or what the gaming community is talking about. Now, I kind of take issue with this whole idea of just direct all your ire at the executive producer or the first person you see in the credits when the credits roll. He also comes forward and says that he was the lead on games like Anthem, for example, as his name is one of the first names that show up in the credits of Anthem, which I imagine he's gotten quite a bit of when that game came out and turned out to be, well, a steaming pile of garbage, unfortunately, as somebody who has played through the entirety of Anthem and was very let down by that game, considering as much reverence as I had for Bioware at the time, even post Mass Effect Andromeda, to see that happen, that was really unfortunate. But typically for me personally, I don't usually go after people or express my distaste to them personally about a product being bad. I just don't do that, don't have the time for it, don't care for it. That's not to say that I don't think people should do that, however. Now, my issue with this is this idea of, like he said, you shouldn't do it because you don't understand the conditions that led to the game being bad. I kind of take issue with that because it is not the customer's obligation to understand, let's say, a restaurant, for example. It is not the customer's obligation to understand the chef or their conditions or whether or not the chef has had a bad day for the reason why their food is burnt on the table. All they know is their food is burnt and they spent a lot of money for it. All right. So while the chef may have been having a bad day, which potentially led to the food being burnt in the first place, the chef also just ruined someone else's day because now they have burnt food. It doesn't solve the problem of there was money being spent. Money is gone. $70 does not buy you Cruelty, so he claims. But I would argue, to a certain degree, it kind of does. Because whether or not I understand the developer's plight or whose fault it was or whose fault it wasn't, at the end of the day, my $70 is still gone. And I'm not getting that back. And in some cases, depending on where you live and how high the taxes are where you live, that $70 is looking more like $80. At the end of the day, whether I understand it or not, or even care to understand it, my $70 is still gone. And even worse is my time has been wasted. And time is a thing you most certainly cannot get back. It is not the obligation to the customer to understand the plight of what's going on in the studio when they see a product that is less than satisfactory. And it's unfortunate because when you see developers come out and make statements like this, it is very clear that they are completely tuned out to their customers and tone deaf about what's going on and the reason why this stuff is happening in the first place. He talks about why people shouldn't celebrate when layoffs happen at a studio. Axe says, I could use a bit more severity, to be honest. Truth be told, yeah. Truth be told, yeah. It's like I understand the idea of not wanting to send people after specific individuals and harass them. Like nobody ever condones, like they'll try to say that people keep sicking, like major content creators, like let's say an Asmongold, for example, and they keep accusing him of sicking his fan base on specific developers, so on and so forth. But when you actually take time to actually look at what Asmongold does when he reacts to a lot of content, he's not sicking his audience on people. He's just reacting to content. And sometimes there are crazy people in that audience that have the idea to go out and harass the developers. It does not matter how many times you say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. There are crazy people on the internet that do not care and just want to watch the world burn. It happens. But a lot of people that tend to make that argument is not because they're upset about the people harassing them. They're just mad about the fact that this major content creator who has a lot of influence is saying something and they don't want him to say something. So they use the quote unquote attack vector of sicking your fan base on developers as a means to try to silence them. And you'll see that a lot. And this is not to necessarily be mean to our friend Mark here, who's going off on this tangent, because truth be told, when you look at the comments of this video, he's not getting up in arms about people effectively ratioing this video. When you look at this video, it's sitting at 5,000 dislikes to 100 likes, okay? And he was in the comments talking about the dislike ratio and basically how people, he employs people to watch the entire video, which I did. So he's kind of been a relatively decent sport about the whole thing. And to be fair, it does take a lot of bravery to get up here and talk like this, knowing that you're probably going to get a lot of heat. So I do have respect for him for at least coming out and doing that much about it. But the idea of $70 not allowing you to express your dissatisfaction for a product that is less than satisfactory, I think it's a little tone deaf, because it is most certainly not the customer's obligation or responsibility to do all that research to understand the inner workings of a studio to find out whether or not the thing they bought is garbage. Especially when you plop down, let's say $70 in this example, for a game that you're not happy with. And even worse, considering, like, oh, okay, well, why not just refund the game then if you don't like it? It's like, on most platforms, you have a 2-hour window after purchase to refund the game. If you have played the game for more than 2 hours, you cannot refund it. And even worse, especially in the case of a lot of AAA games, where 2 hours is not even enough to get you past the goddamn tutorial. You will spend upwards of 2 hours just playing the freaking tutorial. You haven't even gotten into the meat of the game yet. Because a lot of AAA games are so mechanically bloated that it takes upwards of 2 hours just to teach you how to play the damn game. Whoa, hello. Here's that resub. Much appreciated, Dark Sun. Much appreciated. So, yeah, that's not a good excuse. It really isn't. And especially in this economy, $70 is a lot of money. And one of the things he kept saying in the video was that, well, it's just a video game. It's like, it's just $70. It's just a video game. It's like, just a video game, just $70. In this economy? Which, if anything, is an indication of just how tone deaf they are when it comes to the average citizen out there who is just trying to enjoy the content. Which I can imagine being very easy to do when in many cases you don't have to pay for it yourself. Especially in access media, where those people generally don't pay for the games they play. They get sent free copies. The rest of us have to pay. Exactly, Dark Sun says in chat. $70 is a lot. It's a lot to people. It's a lot of money to people right now, unfortunately, because that's just the economy we live in. And like I said before, especially if you live in a territory with high taxes, that $70 is damn near $80. That's a lot of money for a video game. And even worse when we live in a time where you have the CEO of Take-Two coming out and saying, actually, we should be charging people $100 for video games. Like, what? $100? For a single game? And what a lot of people tend to fail to understand is the more money you charge someone for a product, the more they are going to scrutinize it, because they're going to correlate the higher price with premium quality. And if you are not dishing out that premium quality correlated to the price, they have all the reason in the world to be upset with you for not meeting that standard. Raising the prices of games is not going to make this any easier. It's going to make it worse. You think it's bad now? You start charging $100 for games and see just how bad it can actually get. Again, that's not to say that people should go out of their way to directly threaten and harass developers. I have said time and time again that people shouldn't do that. I tell my own community to never do that, although I know my community doesn't do that. Considering how small it is, and I know most of the people in it, I know that you guys don't do that, but even then, I still say to not do it. But even then, it's not a guarantee that people won't. Especially when they spend a lot of money on a game that ends up being garbage. So yeah, people are going to celebrate when a studio gets shut down because they spent a lot of money on a game that was garbage. And even worse, when people have attachments to these franchises, like let's say a Dragon Age, for example, and you go out of your way to literally shit on everything they love about the franchise by churning out garbage within the franchise's name. You say it's just a video game, and in many cases it is, but in some cases of long-running franchises like a Mass Effect or a Dragon Age, for example, people have emotional attachments to this stuff. And when you do that stuff a major disservice, they're going to be pissed off. Russia says, if I'm paying $7 for an indie game, I'm very forgiving of what's going on. If I'm paying $60, then I expect that game to be worth $60. Exactly. He just says, you start charging $100 for games, and you're going to have two sets of angry people. One that's angry that the price is so high, another that's angry that the price is so high and the game is garbage. Exactly. Like, you think it's bad now, it's going to get a lot worse if we start charging $100 for games. And that's a very real possibility going into the future. Like a lot of, and it's not just him, like a lot of developers keep talking about how gamers should be empathetic towards developers. And that would be fine if the developers were more empathetic to the plights of their customers and the demands of the customers at the same time. Which, unfortunately, whenever something bad happens, and all these studios do is call out the gamers by calling them racist, bigots, misogynists, Nazis. When all you keep doing is that all the time, and you're supposed to get sympathy from people? From the very same audience you keep belittling all the time? When something bad happens, you take zero accountability, but you want to blame it on everybody else? Like, it's not our fault when your games are bad. It's your fault. You're the ones making them. So when I see stuff like this and I see like a lack of accountability, or the ability to say, you know what, hey, maybe we screwed up. At least once. Yet to see any of that. Or at least some form of acknowledgement that maybe things weren't all that great. The only thing he said in this video was that he was the one that was behind Anthem, or at least the guy that most of the blame for Anthem should go to. That's the only thing he acknowledged. That's it. And he says, well, send all your blame to the higher-ups, like executive producers and stuff like that. I'll tell you this much. As somebody who has worked service in an industry, we'll just say like retail. We'll say retail. In many cases, retailers do have a place where customers can voice their dissatisfaction or give their feedback to. The thing about that is that there is no guarantee that feedback will ever reach the people who can actually do something about it. Because the people who are designed to take that feedback, it is now under their whim to decide whether or not your feedback is even worthy to be dished out to the people that can do something. And in many cases, they don't care. And even worse, when you have these massive studios like a Ubisoft, for example, which employs thousands of employees, where when a customer or a user has to issue a complaint or a bug report, it has to go through 8 different chains of command before it actually reaches the developers behind the game to actually fix the damn bug. And even then, you might not ever see it get fixed. There's just no guarantee. And here's the thing. A lot of people know that that's the case, which is why they send their ire to the people they know are responsible for it. Are they always right when they do that? Is the blame always accurate when they do that? Of course not. And I do blame that in part to the fact that the gaming industry is so secretive about what goes on behind the scenes and just a general lack of transparency when it comes to game development. There's a lot of that going on. That's not our fault. That's your fault because you don't like the idea of letting people in on the development behind these major AAA titles. So don't be upset with us for not understanding what's going on behind the scenes when you go out of your way to make sure that we don't know. Says a lot of people grew up with games like Mass Effect, so there's a lot of fond memories and emotions attached to that franchise. Exactly. So when a studio fucks it up by pushing garbage, people are going to get angry. Exactly. That's what happened at the end of Mass Effect 3, right? When people were upset about the red, green, blue endings that you got at the end after years of waiting for that franchise to come to its epic conclusion And people were very dissatisfied with the way the whole thing wrapped up. Like, that's years of bonds with specific characters and watching them die and hoping that this thing reaches an epic climax, which in many cases ends up, the expectations always end up exceeding what the final product is. Unfortunately, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But as an indication of just how attached people get to these franchises, where when you fuck it up, you're going to hear about it. You're going to hear about it a lot. Which is why I say all the time that is, if you're going to be the person that decides to helm up a major franchise that people love and adore, you better be ready to be the one that people go to and point fingers at when you fuck it up. You are never going to live that down. So you better be ready for that when you take on that challenge. And when people do come out to you for fucking it up, they're not wrong for doing so. So again, $70 does not buy you Cruelty, but it does buy you something. It does buy you the right to be pissed off. And when a studio continues to go out of its way to indicate that it's not listening to the market or the user base, yeah, they can celebrate when people get laid off, because it's very clear that you aren't the one to make things better because you're not listening. Like I said in the last episode, do not feel guilty whenever a studio sees layoffs, and those layoffs are a result of them screwing up a franchise or a title that you were very invested in. Don't feel guilty about that, especially if they have been told time and time again that that's not what you wanted. They chose to ignore you. Looking at you, Suicide Squad and Rocksteady. Because at the end of the day, like I said before, that's $70 wasted. $70 that you're not going to get back. And even worse, that's time that you are not going to get back. Time being an expendable resource that you cannot refund. Anyways, I think that's all I got for today's episode, folks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. He just says, it ain't nothing personal. The product/service just not meeting my expectations, and I won't be spending my time or money here. Exactly. Suicide Squad is pretty much the poster child for this. Exactly. Like, there's a point in time where in some cases where you do want to feel sorry for people that are in these positions that do lose their jobs. There's a lot of developers at these companies that just want to make good games, but are unfortunately at the whims of the higher-ups where they have to crank out this shit. And they want to maintain, like, they have to make a living somehow, right? So they have to do what they're told. But the thing is, we don't know who those people are because, again, game development is so secretive and there's such a lack of transparency about it that you'll never know who those people are. It's unfortunate that it happens, but there was a point in time where I was like, maybe we shouldn't be this upset about this stuff. Maybe we shouldn't get this angry about it. Maybe we shouldn't have this much ire and vitriol in regards to it. But considering this has been years going of developers not listening to the user base, dismissing it as, oh, they're just a bunch of racist bigots and Nazis and misogynists. Like, you keep throwing around those terms, and they've pretty much lost all meaning as of late. It doesn't matter how many times you call somebody a racist or misogynist or a Nazi. It's not going to matter anymore. It's like the boy who called Wolf. You keep doing it. You keep saying it over and over again to the point where people stop paying attention. Where every time you use it, it means nothing. Those words have lost all meaning because it's been thrown around so much and incorrectly. No one cares anymore. Yeah, exactly, Dark Side. Because there are actual Nazis now, and the word has lost meaning because it's been thrown around so easily. So no one cares. People aren't paying attention anymore. And you have no one else to blame for yourselves for throwing it around so much. That's why there's no sympathy. There's no sympathy or empathy because you're not showing any empathy to your customers. Sorry, if you don't understand their plight, they're not going to understand yours. If you don't understand why they would be upset, then they're not going to care what happens to you if you get laid off. And they will celebrate. And the thing is, they're not wrong for doing so. All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you all for watching. That's my last preamble for today. For those that missed the beginning of the episode, you can check out the archive, of course. I'll try to split this thing up into clips for those who want to get it in more bite-sized forms and post that up on my YouTube channel as well. But that's going to do it for today's episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. I will see you guys again in 2 weeks for episode 14. Hopefully there's a lot more interesting topics to get into as well. If you want to check out this video, this is from, I believe his name is Mark Dara? Yeah, Mark Dara on Games, the YouTube channel. If you want to watch the entire video for yourself, you're more than welcome to. It is literally titled, Your $70 Does Not Buy You Cruelty, or Doesn't Buy You Cruelty. Which he kind of, like at the beginning of the video, he kind of hedges a little bit and says, $70 does not buy you the ability to be unkind. So you say $70 doesn't buy you cruelty in the title. But you hedge that by saying that it doesn't buy you the ability to be unkind. Which, if we're gonna be honest here, those are completely different ends of the spectrum here in terms of being mean to people. But anyways, all right, guys, I'm out of here. Thank you all for watching. As always, you have a wonderful day or night, depending where you are in the world. You all stay classy, stay sharp. Don't do anything that I wouldn't do, and I will catch you guys again in 2 weeks. You guys have a good one. Love you all. I'm out of here. Deuces. And fade to black.